you just never know what somebody else is carrying
No.
or how far back.
No, and you can't compare. You can't compare. We all do things in our own time. We all handle things in our own way. And it's so interesting because it's shaped by our experience and our story. And they say that your experience and your story actually does change the biology in your brain.
When life throws a challenge at you, one thing is certain: to find a resolution for every issue, every problem, for everybody, there's more than one way. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the More Than One Way podcast. I'm Whitney Ross, and with me, as always, is my good friend Thom Rasnick.
Hey, Whitney.
Hey, Thom, how you doing today?
I am good. I'm really good because I have a person who I love with us here today, Deedee Brownlee.
Great.
Deedee's background in mental health, and she works right now at an elementary school as a guidance counselor, helping people, kids who need kind of a lot of help. So I'm glad you're here, Deedee. We're glad you're here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And so Deedee sent us this clip the other day, and I thought it was so funny and so powerful that we want to share it with you.
Hey, Cal.
Hey.
I got the report on the end of year financials. Good.
Oh, good.
Good. Really great. You killed this quarter.
Okay.
Cal, seriously.
All right. Okay.
Seriously.
Who told you that Emily and I are getting divorced?
Amy heard you crying in the bathroom. We all thought it was cancer.
Oh.
Thank God, man.
Yeah, just my relationship.
Thank God. Oh. Divorce.
I'm so lucky.
You are.
I have to go pick out furniture now.
Okay. You go for it. It could have been cancer, buddy. Hey, everyone. It's just a divorce.
All right, buddy. Thanks. Feels good.
I just so appreciate it. I so appreciate you sending that because I've gotten a lot of good thoughts about it. It's taken me to places where the whole week, right, where I've just thought about. This clip is trying to get at, in a funny way, something extremely important and serious, and that is.
And well, it's funny to us, and we laugh because we get it.
Yeah.
We've been there, right? Everybody's been in that place where you think you're being vulnerable to someone and they just dismiss it.
Yeah. And what's that all about? Because we're trying to get at something like somebody going through a traumatic experience, but it's minimized. What's that all about, do you think?
Well, there could be several reasons for that. I think that I've experienced is I've been on both sides of it. I've been the person that probably minimizes it, and I've been the person that has shared and been like, oh, okay, they didn't understand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that from the person that minimizes it, it could be that they feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it. They don't want to go there. Or from the person who's sharing it, and they get that that reaction, they think, oh, something's wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when that happens, it seems like we don't then take serious what somebody's actually going through.
Right.
So instead of maybe having some kind of empathy or compassion, we go right to either minimizing or maybe even something worse.
Yeah.
Which would be what? Judgment.
Judgment.
Right?
Yeah. So I was going to say, I think that's what people feel. I think that's what people feel when you get a reaction like that. And then you feel almost re-traumatized.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, I should be over this. So, yes, before we start, I did want to say that this discussion about trauma and about things people have gone through can bring up a lot of emotions for people. It can bring up emotions, at certain points in our lives, and it can bring up a lot of really raw emotions. So I want to make sure everybody knows that we're very sensitive to that, and we want to show compassion to that and grace to that. And hopefully after listening to this, you'll have more hope.
Yeah, that's great. Once again, because even though the clip is funny, it's not trying to make light of something as
Right.
serious as a trauma, especially a trauma that has an effect on the people going through it, which might be the very definition of trauma, right?
Absolutely. So I want to talk a lot about a book that I recently read called What Happened to You. And I want to get into why they have that title. But yeah, there's a really difficult time it's really hard to define trauma.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that it affects people differently. There's big traumas like a hurricane or a car accident or a fire, or there's little teeny, that I think in the book they call it microaggressions that people might feel if they're the out group in a certain situation. They might not feel that sense of belonging, which is something that is crucial to all of us as humans. It's one of our basic needs, is that feeling of belonging, to feel safe.
So they won't feel the sense of belonging, and just that in and of itself can feel like a trauma?
Absolutely, yes. If you're the out group, and you are constantly reminded of that, that pattern of your stress response, they say can add up to the exact same effect that you can have when you have a big event.
Okay. Right.
That's what they say in the book.
Right. The book. So I have a story about that, but I wondered, before I go off on the story, do you have like an example of that in your life, or life of somebody you've seen, or would you rather me just go off?
Seeing trauma in someone? Is that what you mean?
I mean, someone's going through the effects of trauma because of somehow or another they're the out group or they're in the minority, and what it does to the person, or what it potentially can do to the person.
Absolutely. Okay, so I don't know if y'all are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I often refer to it because I just think it's so important. So picture a triangle, and on the bottom, the basic needs are like food and water. And then right above that is safety. Right above that is belonging and friendships and connection. And then the very top is being your best self, okay? So if those things down low are threatened, then it's really hard to get any further up. So yes, I do see a lot of people, I see a lot of children who are operating out of when those needs are threatened. And it's really, really hard for them to feel secure enough to learn anything, to think rationally out of their reasonable mind, because how they've learned, to respond to the world is that it's a threat. And so it actually makes sense how they're reacting because of what they've learned through their experiences.
Right. Right. So until you get the bottom needs met, it's impossible or extremely difficult to get to the top needs.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what you're saying is a lot of people who are in that trauma of, I don't even have my basic, I don't have enough food or water or safety. And so that's where I'm always operating.
Yes.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's so interesting because we might not think about a person who's in that position. We might just see the bad behavior or the so-called bad behavior. Right?
Yeah, we don't always know what someone's going through or what they've
really
been through
don't.
that day as far as what they've had to survive just to be where they are.
Yeah. And so the reaction, oftentimes I think about it for myself or other people, is to just react to the behavior, to what's happening right there in that moment, as if that person just made a bad choice or was free to choose. And what I hear you saying is when you're living in a place of intense trauma, the choices are limited if they're even there.
That's exactly right. So I think part of feeling safe and secure is actually a privilege that not all of us had when we were growing up. So I don't love the word privilege. I really don't. But if you think about it, if you were growing up and your life was predictable and controlled, and you experienced small stresses like your vocabulary test or your basketball game or things like that are controlled and predictable, then you start to realize that little stress response that you have is okay, and you become resilient. But if your stressors are things that you aren't able to control and you cannot predict, like exposure to violence or abuse or neglect, then your understanding of what stresses you out is just chaos, and you aren't able to control it, and it's just coming from every direction. So you're learning that the world is unpredictable and that you should be defensive, right? So it's hard to be vulnerable when you're not feeling safe. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So you, my guess is you experienced that kind of in big ways, but you also told me a story about being in Starbucks where you kind of experienced that in a smaller way. Do you mind sharing that? Because I think it's funny.
Well, I have to say, so I was going through the Starbucks line, and my friend was like, "Do you know about the Starbucks app?" And I was like, "No, so don't, this is new for me." But she ordered her drink on the Starbucks app, and it was ready so fast that I was like, "Well, let's get out of the line." So, and there was just enough room for me to back up and be able to get out of the line that I wasn't going to hit anybody. But anyway, so I started backing up, and the person behind me, and I wasn't going to hit them, they start just flicking me off and throwing their hands up. And I was literally thinking to myself, you're going to be closer to getting your drink, not further away, when I get out of the line. And it was a perfect time for me to say, I wonder what happened to them. Because it's probably that they've had some experiences that led them to act that way. And it probably makes total sense why they got so angry. But I think it's easy for our minds to go, what a jerk. Oh my gosh. And flick them back off, right? And then we're in World War III because I was getting out of line.
That's right.
So how do you break out of that kind of cycle?
Where I'm assuming that man from Starbucks could be? Is that what you're saying? Okay. So what they say in our book, what happened to you is let's say that you are starting to notice that you're overreacting to things like people getting out of line in front of you. If you take the time to sit with yourself and really think, what about that made me so angry? And you're not trying to fix it that day. You're trying to notice. You're trying to sit with that thought. And then you have safe people in your life that you can talk to. And you have safe environments in your life where you can have little reassurances throughout the day and have that feeling of belonging and feel like you're around people who you can trust. Then I think you can really start putting together, I just had come from, my aunt's house, and boy, what I feel when I'm there is this. And then why do I feel that when I'm at my aunt's house? And start really digging into that. And in this book, I don't even know if I've mentioned who writes it and who's the co-author. It's a book by Dr. Perry, and Oprah Winfrey is the co-author. And a really interesting anecdote that Oprah shared was that she had some terrible, everybody knows she had some terrible experiences when she was little. And she references one of them about, and I'm really not sure on the details about her experiences, but she references one that her grandmother used to put a chair up against the doorknob because they weren't feeling safe in their bedroom, where I think she shared with her grandmother. And she said that, fast forward 40 years or however long, and she said she's up at the top of this penthouse suite with security and all the amenities and security that she could ever ask for, and she still doesn't feel safe there. And she said, I didn't know why, but I just had that thought sit with me. I let it sit, and she said, and one day I read in the newspaper about a school shooting. She said, I read about it, and I can't remember. It's been a while. This is a long time ago. And she read about it in the newspaper, and she said what really struck her, and really she had a light bulb, was when she heard that the principal said, no, I'm not going to lock that door. I'm not going to lock the door on our school because I don't want to feel scared. I don't want our kids to feel scared because we're going to rise above this. And she had this light bulb. I know why I'm so scared. She made that connection. She targeted what it was in her story that made her act the way she was acting. And then she was able to reason and say, I don't have that same threat anymore. I don't need to act like that anymore. And so she was able to start the healing.
Yeah. So part of the healing is acknowledging it.
Right.
Recognizing that this happened, which takes us so far away from our initial thing.
Yes.
Right.
The minimizing,
Yes.
right? Oh, that's not so bad.
Right.
Right. At least it's not cancer, you know.
Right,
So
right.
that's how you get stuck is what I'm hearing you say.
Right.
I get stuck when because it's too painful, because I don't want to go there. I don't. And then it just plays itself out in ways that I'm not even aware of. So in order to move past it, and my understanding of what you're saying is you never really get over it.
No.
But you can live with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there's where the power is.
Yeah.
You don't want to even get over it. You want to be able to live and move forward holding on to it and understanding it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you put it, Thom, but in one of your sermons or several of your sermons, you've said that it's so beautiful when people are at their peak, when they are their best. And I feel like that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to become our best. And in order to do that, we have to get to know ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was really cool in the book. They said something about how a lot of our traumas have come before we even had an autobiographical memory.
Yeah.
We're not even able to get there with how underdeveloped our brains were at that time.
Yeah.
So they say in the first 2 months of your life, that sounds crazy.
Wow.
You're really forming so many synapses, and you're trying to figure out where you are in the world and understand and process everything that's coming at you, because it's the first time you've seen these things. That is the most impressionable your brain is.
Wow.
And this blows my mind. Dr. Perry says that if you take a child who has a really traumatic first 2 months of life, then let's say they're adopted by somebody and they're taken well care of, they don't do as well as a child that had a wonderful, nurturing first 2 months of their life and then went into turmoil. I know, that's really hard to
amazing.
believe.
Oh my goodness.
He says it. I promise. It's really
That's
hard to
amazing.
believe.
Well, I mean, but it's similar to something that I've heard by a guy who's a Stanford neuro biologist, and he talks about people's behavior can get affected in utero.
Interesting.
All right, so that the stresses and the strains that are going on within the environment, and especially, and it's not the mom's fault, not blaming,
No.
but especially the stresses and the strains that a mom might be living through directly affects which makes sense, right?
Yes.
But that's how far back it can go.
Wow.
And then Whitney one time was even talking about like multi-generational.
Yeah, there's some studies that talk about multi-generational trauma and how that's passed down and seeing evidence of that. So it's something that a parent or a grandparent or even further back went through, that there's still some signs and markers of that potentially.
That's really interesting.
Through generations.
Yeah.
So
all of this to say is kind of we all go through it on some level,
Right.
at smaller and larger ways, and the way to move through it is to acknowledge it, to work with it, to get somebody to help you work with it, in smaller and larger ways. So it might take longer for some, or and so much is going to depend on the individual and how they're experiencing the traumatic event. So all that to me it makes me hope and wish that as a human beings living on this planet together, that might lead us to see one another through the eyes of compassion.
Absolutely.
And kindness, because like Whitney said, you just never know what somebody else is carrying
No.
or how far back.
No, and you can't compare. We all do things in our own time. We all handle things in our own way, and it's so interesting because it's shaped by our experience and our story. And they say that your experience and your story actually does change the biology in your brain. So it's actually a thing. And I told you a million times about an experience I had when I was jogging, and my friend had a dog with her, and we thought, we don't know if it was coyotes or foxes, but that's beside the point, because the feeling was real. We were chased, right?
Oh, wow.
And what was so interesting, and we laugh about it now, and I think that's beautiful to laugh at how we handled it differently. But she was saying, pick up the stick, do this, do that. I couldn't talk.
Yeah.
I truly was paralyzed because I think it was that threat like that we were talking about. You can't even access that part of your brain. I couldn't talk. I couldn't hear her. And she was telling me what to do, right? And we laugh about that, but it was a very traumatic experience. So it's traumatic on that, but also how people reacted was interesting.
To you.
Yes, to us. When we would tell them, they're like, they don't do that. There's no coyotes in your neighborhood. Are they? And we were like,
I was there.
right? And it's that same thing of, at least one cancer, right?
Yeah.
It
At least there
really,
wasn't a wolf, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Or, tiger.
Yeah, right.
But it was a real experience, and we handled it differently during the time. We handled it differently after, and it was the same experience.
Yeah.
So,
That's a great example of not to overuse the word, but there's more than one way to live. There's more than one way to go at this stuff. And like I said, and my hope, and this comes up within the spiritual realm a lot, is that what helps us to see one another through the eyes of compassion and kindness rather than through the eyes of judgment and punitive punishment, right? And I got a story about that if you want to hear it.
I do.
Yeah. All right. So gather around the fire, children.
We have little children in front of us gathering around now.
You can't hear them. They're very quiet.
Tom's got a guitar.
What?
I said Tom has a guitar.
Yeah.
He starts singing.
So, anything
The
but
hat.
kumbaya. So it's a story. Jesus is in this town, and he's teaching people. He's hanging out, teaching people in the town, and all of a sudden there's all this commotion. And there's this group of religious leaders who are constantly trying to catch him up. They're constantly trying to get him to do something so that they can either arrest him or discredit him or whatever. So the commotion is this group of religious leaders has a woman, and they bring this woman up to Jesus, who's sitting with some people around him. They toss the woman into the center of, like a circle type thing. And they say, "Teacher, we just caught this woman in the very act of adultery." The very act of adultery. Like, that's creepy in and of itself. Like, why are you hanging around?
Yeah, exactly.
But at any rate, yeah. And then they say, so since this is back in the day, they say, and the law says that we're allowed to stone her to death. What should we do? Okay, so here's trauma, right? And here's a response to trauma. We caught her. We've already publicly humiliated her. How far can we take this? Because obviously she's a bad person, right? Without any of the idea of what we've just been talking about, all that she's come through. Why on earth would somebody run the risk, since it's legal to stone her to death? Why would she do that? Or anything like that. So not thinking about her one bit, not one bit. So Jesus, the story says, writes in the ground, and then they say, well, what can we do? What can we do? And he says, well, I'll tell you what. The first one of you who's never has no sin in their life, which to me means who's never done anything from their weakest self,
right?
Who's never lived their life from a weak place and done something that they wish they hadn't done. Okay, so that's sin to me in this definition. And he says, if those of you, one of you who's never sinned, you go ahead and cast the first stone. And it works. They all disperse. And he's left there, the story says, with just the woman. And he says to the woman, so where'd they go? Is there nobody here to condemn you? And she said, no, sir, they're all gone. And he says, well, I don't condemn you either. And then he says, go and sin no more. And what go and sin no more means is go and don't live your life out of a trauma. Go and don't live your life out of repetitive behaviors that you're not really aware of. Right? So he's not putting her down. He's saying go and live a more whole life.
Right.
And it comes from that place, once again, all comes from that place of neither do I condemn you. And once again, that's my hope for this conversation, is that people can see we don't know what each other's carrying. Why don't we start with compassion?
Absolutely, because we look at these children and we have a little bit more patience with children. But when you live with that trauma and you aren't able to really do the work to try and start the repair on that trauma, then in the adult world, you're right. You're judged, you're punished, you're more on the out group, and that just creates more trauma.
Yeah.
And it pushes you further away. And instead, you're right, if we came from a place of trying to understand and trying to learn the story and trying to understand their experience, a lot of times you can see exactly how they got to that point.
Yeah.
And then you're able to forgive and accept. And it's freeing to see someone in that way instead of having so much judgment and condemnation, for something.
Yeah. I think about that for myself too, to see myself that way rather than not, for each of us to see ourselves that way. Can we give ourselves some grace? Can we cut ourselves some slack? And I often wonder sometimes if people think, well, you're going to get away with something or something like that. In my experience, that's not my experience. My experience is what you're saying about trauma is we carry it with us. So the trauma might be, once again, like with this woman, I made a really, really costly mistake. But rather than define my whole life by that, can I see myself through the eyes like Jesus of compassion so that I can move forward? In all the ways that you talked about what dealing with trauma, how we move forward.
Well, and this woman, she may have, if she's able to really look back on her story, she might be able to pinpoint, gosh, I was feeling this kind of way.
Yeah.
And so I can see what led me to that decision, that mistake.
Yeah.
And then that right there can help her work on, why was I feeling that way?
Yeah.
Where'd I get to that point? And start that repair. Like Oprah had that aha moment. I understand why I felt that way. And now how do I move forward with that?
And it takes as long as it takes, right?
It takes as long as it takes.
Yeah.
I think what I want to make sure people understand is in order to really get to your best self, that top of that Maslow's hierarchy, you don't just get there just quickly.
Yeah.
You have to get to know yourself and understand your story, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's not without flaws that you get there.
Right.
It's not without trauma
you
get there,
The only one other thing that I would just add, and I don't know how it would fit in with the whole, is it's people like Oprah or like anybody who's been willing to go through the trauma who end up being the ones who can help others who are going through trauma the best.
Right.
Because they have some level of empathy over judgment, and a lot of it is because they can put themselves in the other person's shoes. They can say, okay, I've been through something that was really hard to deal with, and I wasn't always my best self. I'm going to help this person. Right. Once again, to me, the big thing is if I'm not the one in trauma, or even if I am, it's how do I help this person rather than how do I condemn this person?
Absolutely. And they say that the everyday moments where people are reassured and felt like they belong are really important. And you can go to a therapist once a week, but those everyday moments where you feel like you belong and that you are safe are really, really important. So everybody can do that.
Yeah, every day.
Yeah, I think we have moments all the time that we can do that. And I think that's such an important point, too, because it can be traumatic to think I have to figure this out on my own.
Yeah.
Right.
And so to have someone like you in a school that's there that can listen and really hear where these kids are coming from, or to be that person for somebody else with the idea of you don't have to go through it on your own. There are people that want to guide you, be there with you, help you understand what it is that you don't understand, that you're trying to make sense of in the midst of this chaotic whirlwind that you're in. It really isn't something that you should then bear the additional burden of, I've got to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because, that just adds to it with the idea of, you talk about being in the out group, now I'm alone and feeling like I'm inferior because then somehow it becomes my fault, and I start this whole cycle where, that whole compassion piece that you're talking about is such a proactive way that we can all be supporters of each other in that process.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Deedee, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. And we're glad that you shared a resource. We always love to be able to share those with our listeners. So we'll have the link to the book, What Happened to You, in the description there, so you can check that out for yourself. And thank you so much for listening. And we would love to hear your thoughts. If you have something that pops up for you or moves you that you would like to discuss, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the More Than One Way podcast, brought to you by the Center for Spiritual Practice in Knoxville, Tennessee. We really appreciate your time and would love to hear your feedback. You can reach us by emailing hello@morethanonewaypod.com, or you can connect with us on social media using the handle @morethanonewaypod. If you found this episode helpful, we hope that you'll share it with your friends, with your family, with people you work with all the people who you know. Thank you and take care.